This is ContraZoom, where we go back and forth about film. I'm your host, Dakota Arsenault. On today's show, we are continuing our A24 Retrospective series. This is our 29th edition of the series. You can go back and listen to episodes 277, A24 Retrospective Dark Places, 274, A24 Retrospective The End of the Tour, or go all the way back to episode 108, A History of A24 Films, to get the full backstory of the company. Today we are looking at the 2015 film Mississippi Grind, directed by Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck. The film stars Ben Mendelsohn as Gary, a down-and-out gambler who is at the lowest point of his life until he meets Ryan Reynolds, Curtis, at a poker game, who seems to be Gary's good luck charm. I want to welcome Eric Zhu to the show. Eric has a Substack called The Insert that you can subscribe to that features reviews, essays, and more. He is also a member of the Cascadian Film and Television Critics Association. Welcome to the show, Eric. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Dakota.
Of course.
I'm so excited to be on the podcast. It's surreal to me to hear your podcast voice and be like, it's live.
It is live. Yeah, you're actually not the first person to say that. I think it was Todd or something like that, where I did the outro and he's like, oh, wow. I just assumed I was just listening to the podcast while you were saying that. So I appreciate
I'm so happy
to be on. As I mentioned, you are also a member of the CFTCA, and we did get a chance to meet during the Seattle International Film Festival earlier this year, and that was the first time we met in person. That was really exciting. So I'm glad we got that chance to kind of connect there.
Yeah, me too. That was so much fun. Yeah, so good to see you.
I forget, are you planning on coming up to Vancouver for the Vancouver Film Festival?
Yeah, I'm hoping to go for the first weekend this year. I'm very excited for the lineup. I just saw we're recording this on the day of the early birds, whatever members day. So I was considering getting a pass, but I'm still waiting on press accreditation.
Oh, you'll get in. I believe that. All right. Well, I'm very excited to see you in Vancouver then in a couple months.
Me too.
We're obviously going to have a big critics meet up and do that again, get some drinks together. So it'll be nice to see you then.
Yeah, you too.
All right. Well, before we get into the movie we're here to talk about, it is your first time on the A24 Retrospective series and your first time on the podcast in general, but specifically this series. And as always, we have the A24 4 questions. So I've got some questions for you, and I hope you have some good answers for me. Are you ready?
Yep, let's do it.
All right. So first question, starting real simple. Top 3 A24 films.
Okay, yeah, this wasn't a very simple question. I actually switched out one of my answers 10 minutes before we started recording, but I'm just going to go through them one by one. My first answer is First Cow. This was my, no questions asked. This had to be on this list. I saw this at just the right place at the right time. For one, it was the last film I saw in theaters before the pandemic hit. I was going to school in Southern California, and I saw it in a very empty theater in early March of 2020. But it also hit right as I was getting into Kelly Reichardt. I loved Old Joy and Meek's Cutoff, which I'd seen a few months before. And if you were my friend during that period before First Cow's US release, you know that I talked about this film nonstop. Yeah, I love Kelly Reichardt's tenderness. I love her attention to detail and process. And with First Cow in particular, just the attention to nature. I love John Magaro's characters. Yeah, his tenderness towards nature. One of the parts that I really remember from this movie is his character stopping to turn over a leaf that has a salamander on it. Yeah, it's my number one. No questions asked. For my second, I wanted to choose one of those quintessential A24 movies. I haven't revisited a lot of them in a while, but one of the ones that's really stuck with me is The Lobster. This is my favorite Yorgos movie. I think it's his most emotional movie. It's the one that works the best for me. I haven't really been too big of a fan of his most recent films. I really did not like Kinds of Kindness. But The Lobster, especially with its two huge extremes of the first part of the hotel where you need to find a partner, And the second, where you're in the woods and it's sort of the opposite end of the spectrum. You can't be partnered at all. Um, it really has that wildness, that sadness of not being able to find that middle ground or nuance. And it really works with his stilted style, these sort of unformed people who are just at the whims of these two structures. For the last one, I wanted to pick a horror movie because A24 is so classically connected to horror and elevated horror, especially in the late 2010s. I think I'm choosing one that a lot of people haven't seen. I'm picking In Fabric. This is a film by Peter Strickland. I think he's great. The Duke of Burgundy is like an all-timer for me. In Fabric is a horror movie about this killer red dress and this cult of witches that owns this department store. It's so funny. It's sort of unsettling. And Strickland has this style where he's building on like avant-garde cinema, art cinema, and especially like mid-century exploitation cinema. It's this really woozy, like retro aesthetic. And here it's used as this larger metaphor for this cult of consumerism. It's really funny. It's beautiful. Best A24 soundtrack, like in terms of visuals, like just beautiful. Um, yeah, I had to pick it. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it.
Wow. Okay. So I love the way you approach this question and sort of categorizing and picking different sort of folders to make your list from. So I really appreciate that. First, I'll say with First Cow, that's so interesting that you say that this was the last movie you saw before the pandemic, and it was when you were at school in California, because I have someone who was a guest on the show a few times, someone named Royce Benson, who that was also the last movie he saw before the pandemic, and he was also going to school in California and saw it through his school as well. So like that's such a crazy story that I've now heard it twice, and I'm just like, how is that possible?
That's absolutely insane. I mean, it was just surreal to be there too, because that film is such like a sort of sensory, like comforting, like almost like an ASMR type movie. Like a lot of Kelly Reichardt's movies sort
Mm-hmm.
of act that way. So it was very soothing as the world seemed like it was falling apart. Although that's part of First Cow as well.
Yeah, it's one I really adore. Maybe you two were in the same screening and you were the only two people there.
Yeah.
I don't know. All right, and then The Lobster, classic pick. I agree. I think it's my favorite Yorgos film as well too. I haven't seen Kinds of Kindness yet, but it is my favorite so far. I think he just everything works so perfectly in that movie. And then lastly, with In Fabric, congratulations. You are the first person to name that movie as your favorite. And despite the fact that I have a list of all the A24 movies that I, every once in a while kind of look through and pour through it, I somehow completely have never noticed this title. So I don't even know that it existed until you said this. So I might have to ask you back when I finally get to that episode in probably a couple of years. Because if it's one of your favorites, you'll be an expert person to talk about it.
I would love to. That movie, I don't think I talked about how funny it is. That is one of the funniest A24 movies. It's hilarious.
Excellent. Well, then I will pencil you in. So expect an email in a few years. All right. So then let's go to the second question, which was, what was your introduction to A24?
Yeah, this was a movie I actually left off my three favorites just because I was going to talk about it here. But it was actually Moonlight. I was not that serious about movies I was growing up. And Moonlight and La La Land in 2016 with that Oscar race was sort of my introduction. I don't even know how, I saw both of those movies with my family, mostly at home, and was just really struck by them. In high school, was super into classical music. I played the viola pretty seriously. And these two movies unlocked something about film for me. They're both so musical in different ways, and I'd really never seen anything like them. And with Moonlight in particular, I definitely remember thinking it was one of those movies, one of the first movies I'd seen that wasn't made by one of the major studios. So definitely that logo A24 stuck in my head. And especially so once it won Best Picture, and the whole La La Land Moonlight debacle happened. And then by the next year with like Lady Bird, I definitely knew who they were and was keeping an eye out.
Nice. Yeah. It's a little bit later than most people have answered the question as far as when they became aware, but not by much. Like 2014, 2015 is when people sort of started, I feel, noticing them. Obviously, they only came around in 2013. But like if you
Mhm.
missed a couple of those like early sort of buzzy titles, whether it was something like Spring Breakers or Ex Machina or something like that, you probably weren't really noticing them until Moonlight, which really sort of catapulted them into like the mainstream cinematic conversation. So yeah, it's a little bit later than some of the other responses I've gotten, but not by much. And frankly, I think that's when most people really started paying attention to them, anyways.
Yeah, I definitely don't think I was aware enough about film to be aware of like The Lobster, The Witch, until I got to college.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay, question three: what director, dead or alive, would make a good A24 film?
I'm about to cheat on this one. I have one answer, but I will say one thing I really appreciate about A24 is they're so good at picking young talent. I really like, for example, how much work they do with New York filmmakers, like A Different Man by Aaron Schimberger is coming out later this year that I'm excited for, like The Safdies. I really like all they're doing with younger, like more diverse filmmakers, like especially Julio Torres. I thought Problemista was pretty strong. So I'm just going to shout out a few names, like two of my favorite films that really touch on being Asian American from the past few years: This Closeness by Kit Zoer and Waiting for the Light to Change by Lin Tran. Really small indie movies. I feel like they're people who are poised to make like an A24 film if they chose to do so. But the answer I'm going to give you is Kenneth Lonergan. He's someone who's never missed for me. Margaret is one of my favorite movies ever. It's been almost 10 years since Manchester by the Sea. Like we need something from him, and he feels like a perfect fit to me.
Yeah, what has he been up to? Because I know he's also a playwright. Like, has he just been in the theater world, or is he just kind of enjoying, his life and just doing his own thing? Like, what has Lonergan been up to?
I have no clue. I assume he must be doing theater. I mean, Margaret was such a production. It had such like a fraught production. I wouldn't be surprised if since then he's been like, I'm only gonna do a movie if I really, really need to.
Yeah, and it looks like since then he wrote a mini series of Howard's End. Did he direct it as well? No, he didn't. Yeah, he wrote an adaptation of Howard's End and did like something that was part of a YouTube short series during the pandemic. But yeah, he has not been a busy guy lately. Yeah, I think that's a great example. I think a movie like Manchester by the Sea would sort of fit exactly within the milieu of what A24 does in terms of like these like grounded dramas that they do, these character studies. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic answer.
Yeah, I heard whisperings that he has a new movie. He's working on a new movie. Could be A24. I have no clue. It seems like it would be a good fit.
Yeah, that would be a pretty cool to see him back in the spotlight for sure. All right, and then the last question, the one that's most up to interpretation, is what makes an A24 film for you?
um, yeah, I think A24 is definitely like their identity's really changed, especially in the past few years to me. But I would say what really defines them is like just the semblance of a curatorial sensibility. They're very on trend all the time. Like you see in the late 2010s, they were doing so many like elevated horror films, these maybe more strange, like misanthropic films. Like I think of those Yorgos Lanthimos movies like that. Whereas now they've sort of switched to a glossy, like almost more internet savvy, like aesthetic. For example, like you see like going from elevated horror to something like X or Pearl, or like Bodies, 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 or like the new David Lowery movie has Charlie XCX. The model I was really going for this was thinking of We're All Going to the World's Fair versus I Saw the TV Glow. I still really liked I Saw the TV Glow, but that film was very recognizably an A24 film to me, whereas I would never mistake We're All Going to the World's Fair as one. So that was just something I was thinking about. And I would say I Saw the TV Glow is maybe a bit more direct. It's a bit more sentimental, whereas I thought We're All Going to the World's Fair was a bit more mysterious and abstract. And I saw the TV Glow, especially with the soundtrack, with like Yule and Lorraine and Phoebe Bridgers. Definitely that side of the internet trendiness really spoke to me. But also, just I really appreciate A24. Their brand also connotes this commitment to filmmakers that most other studios don't have. Like they have their house filmmakers, like Ari Aster, the Safdies, David Robert Mitchell, those guys, but they also are so committed to newer filmmakers and also to this old guard. You've been going on your A24 retrospective about some of those Adam McGoy and Gus Van Sant movies, which I hadn't seen because I heard they're not very good. But more recently with like Kelly Reichardt, Claire Denis, Joanna Hogg, like they really do have these filmmakers they're committed to distributing. And I really appreciate them for that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting answer that you gave, and one that I don't think anyone else has sort of touched on yet, and this idea of how they are evolving. And I know, internet discourse isn't real life, but like you'll often see things, I feel like lately in the last year or so, where people are talking about, has A24 fallen off? Is Neon the better distributor, or other distributors coming up that are, putting out better films and things like that, and wondering about how they've been evolving and changing their ethos as a company. And personally, myself, I haven't thought it for the negative, but I do sort of see the transition that they've been going through. And I think you did a great job of sort of touching on how they might be changing and what maybe their priorities, or not necessarily their audience, but the way they want to market themselves and be seen has definitely changed.
Yeah, wasn't there that article that came out last fall that was like A24 is trying to go into more franchise or superhero movies or something like that? They're clearly thinking about how they're trying to evolve and stay afloat.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. It was for I think that they want to be making more big budget films, I think is what
mhm.
the terminology that was quoted as saying. And it's something that I know, right away as soon as that came out, a lot of people were like, "Well, A24 had a good run." And I'm still not totally sure what does that mean. Is this going to be, the return of this sort of mid-sized movie that's mostly been absent from, Hollywood screen or movie screens, because we basically only get this super, high end, high budget, superhero type movies, or on the flip side, the A24 style, which is, $5 million or less. And 5 million sounds like a lot, but it's not really in the world of movie making. We don't really have this mid-budget movie that these days would probably be, 50 to $100 million. And if that's the world that they're wanting to get into, I don't really have a problem with that. We had something like Civil War, which came out this year, that I thought was absolutely fantastic. It's my favorite movie of the year so far, and that fits that budget.
Yeah, I definitely thought Civil War was their first shot at that. And I think they could do it well as long as they're really thoughtful about it. I mean, it's not like they hadn't done superhero movies before. I mean, Everything Everywhere All at Once, like the appeal of that movie is that it's a superhero like multiverse movie at its core. So they've done it before.
Yeah.
So if they just think about it, it'll be okay.
And like, it depends on who they're giving these budgets to. If you're giving these massive budgets to people like Alex Garland or the Daniels or Yorgos Lanthimos or people like that, where I'm not going to be worried how they're going to blow their budget on, that I know that it's just going to make the product probably better, then that's something I'm here for. But if they're just, going to be spending money for the sake of spending money, or doing things with a ton of unnecessary CGI or things like that, then that's something that's going to concern me. But as of right now, I still feel like you're talking about their stable of directors. If they're giving them these budgets where, Alex Garland can now work in this realm because he's shown that he deserves it, has earned it, I'm all for that.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't want them to go into like franchise. Like I heard whisperings of like Halloween, them doing new Halloween movies. Like, I don't want that. But
Yeah.
if they can just give their house directors bigger budgets, choose some new like rising stars to make bigger films, I'm all for it.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, then that was the A24 4 questions, and now it's time to talk about the movie that we are here to talk about.
Can you put me down for 5 tonight on Hawaii over Gonzaga? I have it. I have the money. I literally have the money right here in my hand. I'm looking at it. Oh. Hey, JP? JP?
How's everybody feeling tonight? That's okay by me. Let's play some cards, huh? Aces are good, right?
I'm usually good at reading people, right? But you're all over the map. I can't spot your toe.
Fold. Wanna know why?
Yeah.
I don't care about winning.
Where did you come from?
Mississippi Grind was directed by Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck. The duo rose to prominence with 2006's Half Nelson, and since then have made Sugar, It's Kind of a Funny Story, and were brought into the world of the MCU to direct the first female-fronted movie in the universe with Captain Marvel. This film stars Ben Mendelsohn as Gary, a real estate agent who is more preoccupied with gambling than putting his life back together after his wife and child left him. In a dingy casino in Dubuque, Iowa, Gary plays a regular game of Texas Hold'em. One night, the abrasive and over-the-top Curtis, played by Ryan Reynolds, shows up and lights a spark in Gary. They end up running into each other at a bar after the game where they hit it off and spend the night drinking. A local moneylender calls Gary into a meeting who tells him his debts are due. Gary, feeling trapped, thinks that Curtis is his good luck charm and asks to travel with him to New Orleans, where a huge high-stakes poker game will be happening that Curtis told him about. Curtis decides to stake Gary, and they hit the road, stopping at every casino they can find along the way. Gary isn't exactly upfront with his gambling addiction and debts, and Curtis is nomadic for a reason, and eventually their flaws and old habits start to catch up with them, making this idyllic road trip a more difficult excursion. The movie was an original screenplay by Boden and Fleck, and the film had its premiere at Sundance in January 2015. A few days after its premiere, it was sold to A24 and DirecTV. The movie debuted on DirecTV on August 13th, 2015, and had a limited theatrical run starting on September 25th the same year. This is going to be a spoiler-filled episode, so if you have not watched the film, we suggest doing so first. This movie is an exploration into gambling addictions and showing what not doing the work to rebuild your personal life can lead to. Boden and Fleck have made a career out of movies that toe the line between being heartwarming and soul-crushing. How did Mississippi Grind's emotional highs and lows work for you, Eric?
Yeah, I quite enjoyed Mississippi Grind. I was surprised too. I have to admit, when I saw that I was doing Mississippi Grind and it was like a gambling movie, I was a bit skeptical at first. The gambling movie is not my thing, and the different genres this movie plays in, the road movie, the buddy movie, can be pretty fraught for me. But I quite liked it. I loved this 70s sort of shaggy, like nighttime feel. I loved this road trip through small town America. And I mean, most of all, the two lead performances really worked. Ben Mendelsohn's so great. And Ryan Reynolds, who I'm not really a fan of, we can get into this in a bit, but I think this movie plays off of him very well.
I'm in the exact same boat in terms of the way I view these two lead actors. I love Ben Mendelsohn, and I think this is probably the most unique role I've seen him play. He's sort of an actor that I feel completely slithers into every character and gives you such a remarkable performance that it's hard to forget him. And I'm surprised he's not more famous. Like, literally everything he's in, he's always the best part of it. And I've never seen him play such a sort of sad sack loser type, which is so fascinating because he's normally, a lot of the stuff I've seen him in, he is the villain, to sort of put it mildly, and he's a very terrifying villain. He doesn't need to be physically imposing. What he does with his voice, with his looks, with his attitude, sort of compensate for the fact that he is not a very physically imposing person. And seeing him play someone so different, such a loser in this movie, was just such a breath of fresh air because I loved what he was doing. And much like you, I'm not really a fan of Ryan Reynolds. You know, pause for gasping if people sort of feel that way. But there was a very, very brief era where it looked like he maybe could be a serious actor of high caliber. And this is in that era where it's like, oh, you're actually kind of doing some interesting things. Now, yes, it sort of mostly does revolve around his larger than life personality. And I think that works really well for this character because you really buy into his charm and everything that he's saying. Like, he is the best used car salesman you have ever met. You will buy any car that he wants to sell you. But then when you start to see the flaws in his character, I think that hits even more. And we'll get into it a little bit about what his flaws are. But when they do show up, I think it works really well, and it sort of contrasts nicely with both the character he's playing and our perception of Ryan Reynolds as a person as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, at its core, I think this movie is a buddy movie that's undercut by this innate suspicion of gambling. Like in the first scene, there's that like CD he's listening to that tells there's the CD that Ben Mendelsohn is listening to that goes over various poker tells, and it talks about how if someone's babbling, they're nervous or they're lying, and then immediately Ryan Reynolds walks in talking so much, and the movie wants you to think that this guy is totally lying, that he's really bluffing, but like at his core, he's sort of an earnest guy. Like he actually believes that like the journey is the destination, and I think the movie really just plays off of those two competing ideas. And those are very clearly personified in Ryan Reynolds' character.
It also, this movie feels almost a bit like a romance story too, where you have these two people that, you know, meet and instantly have this spark and connection, and they're sort of falling for each other. And obviously it's not a romantic film between the two of them, but it definitely, I think, touches on a lot of, I don't want to use this word in a pejorative way, but tropes that you expect from a romantic drama, as far as the highs and lows that they both go through, and, you know, finding out each other's secrets and history and things like that. So it definitely feels, you're talking about you being a road trip, a buddy movie, a casino gambling type movie. It also sort of feels like a romantic movie as well too.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, at its core, this is a movie. It's like they can't lose when they're together.
Yes.
And really like very genuinely being friends. And I forgot where they are, but there's a scene where the two of them are talking to someone, and this random guy is like, "It really sucks to be alone," and they're both like, "Yeah." And that's the movie. Like when they're really earnest and really enjoying each other's company, they can't lose.
Yeah, it's almost like they realize that they can't be apart, but also when they're together, you know, maybe things aren't the best. It's a very combative relationship in that sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one thing I really appreciate about this movie is the way that idea of friendship and camaraderie and this humanism overtakes a lot of your more traditional gambling sequences. So like early on, the two characters are playing billiards, and I think Ben Mendelsohn sucks at billiards, and I think Ryan Reynolds bets money on Ben Mendelsohn winning a game, and for that sequence, it's not about like winning or losing. Ryan Reynolds says pretty outright, like, "What's in it for me is I get to see you humiliate yourself," and yeah, like in all of these gambling scenes, it's the vibe of being at the gambling table. It's people being nice to each other that really takes center stage.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about the gambling sequences. I know that's something that could be a bit tricky to show on film, because unless the audience is familiar with the game itself, and obviously they went with the most popular form of poker, which is Texas Hold'em, which I think for the most part everyone kind of has a bit of a cursory understanding of how that works. And a pair of kings is better than a pair of five, sort of thing, where you see that on screen, the audience automatically knows what that means. But how did you find the portrayal of, these the different casino games, because it isn't just poker that they end up playing. They end up playing craps. I don't know if they play slot. Yeah, they play some slot machines and things like that. How did you find the portrayal of gambling in this film as a viewer?
Yeah, I really liked it. I'm not a gambler. I know poker in the very like most basic sense, like basically as as like rudimentary as you can get. So yeah, I really liked how this was more about atmosphere. Like in that way, the title sort of references this other movie too. Have you seen California Split? That's the movie this most reminded me of, and it has that same like hazy, like small town, like not Vegas gambling vibe, where there's a lot of emphasis on these atmospheric effects, like other people talking, or in Mississippi Grind, I was really thinking about the music in the background, or the shuffling of the cards, or the clacking of the chips. And I really appreciated that. I think the movie is really wanting you to find the camaraderie in poker. And when the movie does shift to those very quintessential, stereotypical gambling scenes where it's like locking in on like what cards does this person have, Ben Mendelsohn tends to lose. Really, like this film is more interested in, for example, the woman who there's a woman who beats Ben Mendelsohn for this all-in hand in, I think it might have been like St. Louis or somewhere along the road. And afterwards she says like, I'm sorry, I didn't deserve that. So I really appreciated how this emphasis on relationships played out in this formal aspect in all these gambling scenes. And it's just also just a very pleasurable experience.
Yeah, I have not seen California Split, the Robert Altman film. That's one of a blind spot for me, but I'll have to add it to my list if you're recommending it here. But yeah, I agree. I think it has a nice tactile nature to it where I don't know. I love the sound of people like clinking poker chips together. It sounds so good. There's a good sound to it. And they use that feeling very well. And, you know, the way they shuffle cards and deal that. I think they do a really good job of making you sort of feel very present with these games that they're playing.
Yeah, and it's just also so cinematic. Like poker, I don't always find very cinematic, but when you have all these sensory effects and you really get the energy of the room, like it's pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm. Watching this movie, I was loving the soundtrack. It's basically just like all like 50s and 60s blues music. And so I'm watching this movie, it's a road trip movie, and you're kind of vibing along with it. And I'm like, oh man, this movie can actually kind of be maybe a bit of a comfort movie. I'm really enjoying this. And then by the end, there's so many gut punches that I was like, this isn't really the sort of feel-good comfort movie I was thinking it was. I still really enjoyed it, but there was something about that soundtrack in particular that was such an easy draw-in for me.
Yeah, definitely. I sort of think it does function as a comfort movie because as many gut punches as there are, it ends on such a sentimental, like feel good note that I sort of hated, but we can get into that later. But it is very comforting. Like these, like part of the soundtrack too is in a lot of these scenes, it's playing in the background diegetically in these hazy, smoky, neon lit bars, and or it's accompanied with these montages of the Midwest and the South, these beautiful, just like montages of these cities. It has such a nice rhythm and it's really evocative. So I see what you're saying. It feels great.
Yeah. Speaking of them, you know, going on this road trip aspect, I found it was very interesting. The way they decided to shoot these cities and these casinos and all this sort of stuff was very unglamorous. And to the point where you feel a little, I don't want, not quite as far as gross, but there's such an uneasiness of going into these smoke-filled rooms and you know it's gray and cold outside, and so this isn't much of a reprieve from those elements because you're coming into even harsher elements where this is someone who's got a gambling addiction and owes a lot of money and probably isn't going to do well. Every despite the fact that like we're told Ryan Reynolds is his lucky charm, every gambling scene I expected him to lose still.
Oh, for sure. You can just see in Ben Mendelsohn's eyes, like, how, like, earnest and sort of desperate he is, and you really do expect him to lose, and the various, like, gambling locales they're playing in have that they accentuate that sadness even as they're still sort of indulgent and sentimental. I thought it was really unique. And I mean, it's another one of those aspects that calls back to California Split, which is sort of the same way in these hazy rooms. But it feels unique, especially for a movie from the 2010s.
Hmm. Let's talk about these two lead performances here. Ben Mendelsohn, as I mentioned, is one of my favorite character actors. He's so good, and there's a moment early on where he admits that he owes money to everyone, and he's sort of revealing his debt, and that might be one of the best acting moments I've ever seen, because it just felt like someone truly realizing that they have hit rock bottom, because you can't hit rock bottom until you acknowledge it. And this is him acknowledging, and as a viewer, I'm like, okay, so he can only go up from here. He has now hit his bottom. And this look of sadness on his face to have to admit what he has done with his life to get to this point was just so absolutely heartbreaking for me.
Yeah, like the whole movie, he looks really sad, but his eyes are so emotive. They're so I said he's earnest and like hopeful and like wide-eyed. And then near the end of the movie, you just see this just like long sigh and just like the wind just goes out of him, and it's heartbreaking, and it's a great performance. Like for me watching this movie, I didn't even fully recognize just how addicted he was because he was just so like there's like a childlike quality to him. It wasn't until he visits his wife and tries to steal money I was like, oh my god, like this guy has a problem, like he needs help.
Yeah, that scene in particular when he goes to visit his ex-wife, I truly believe that he was doing that for the right reasons, and that, Curtis had hyped him up enough and it was like, no, he can go and win back his ex-wife. Yeah, let's go do that. And I didn't expect him to be successful, but I didn't expect the scene to play out the way it was. And so he goes and visits his ex-wife, who is I'm blanking on what her name is, the actress that plays her. She played Calamity Jane on Deadwood. That's what I remember her as. But he goes to visit her, and they have this conversation, and he sort of realizes, no, she's rebuilt her life. She is happy. She's remarried. Their daughter is happy. All this sort of stuff. And he doesn't even realize. He's like, oh, where's my daughter? And she's like, it's the middle of the day. She's at school. Where else would she be? Like, how divorced from reality are you that you don't know? I don't know what day it takes place on, but like a Wednesday at 2 p.m. Where else would she be at? And then you think he's like, okay, well, that was his soul crushing moment. He's gonna get out of there with his tail tucked between his legs and go. But then he decides, he goes, oh, I'm gonna go to the washroom. And she's like, you know where it is, go. And then she catches him trying to steal money from her drawer, and it's just like, at that moment, you're just like, come on, what are you doing? What an awful thing to do, to try to steal money from your ex-wife to pay back your gambling debts. And then he tries to justify it to her too. And it just broke my heart.
Yeah, that entire scene is heartbreaking. Like when he is talking about how he's been absent, he's like, I have no money, and she's like, you've never even called.
Yeah, it's not about the money.
It's not about the money.
Yeah. Which is, really sad, because, she was absolutely right. It's like, you never called to wish her happy birthday, Merry Christmas, happy first day of school, nothing like that. She's living her life and growing up. She's got a stepfather now who I presume is an actual father figure for her, and all this sort of stuff. And he can't even bother to pick up the phone or do anything.
Yeah, I mean, the aspect of the daughter is sort of this thing that haunts him through the rest of the movie, and it's hard to tell how much things are actually going to change at the end of the movie. He says he wants to do something for his daughter near the end, and you don't know. You just don't know.
Yeah, he's very much, he's not an unreliable narrator, but he's unreliable in the sense of what he says in one moment, I don't believe he's going to follow through in the next moment, because he very quickly changes his mind.
hmm yeah, you just can't tell what he's gonna follow through on. Like I like know he really means well, but it feels a bit abstract.
Yeah. He would be the type of person that goes, okay, I've got $50 for a birthday gift, but you know what? I can maybe win $100 here and get her an even better birthday gift, and then end up with nothing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. And then we already sort of touched on a little bit Ryan Reynolds factor. I'd love to hear your sort of thoughts on his performance and what he means to this movie in terms of your perception of him as an actor.
Yeah, I mean, his entire shtick is this like very charismatic, like conventionally handsome, like irony pilled guy. Like Deadpool very much so plays on this like this guy cannot be serious. Like um that like sort of cloying, like really annoying irony. And it really plays against this guy who, for all intents and purposes, is a pretty a genuine guide. Like I said earlier, the journey is the destination. He's the guy who walks in a room and buys someone a drink or like asks about seeing a rainbow the other day and wants to make friends. And I can't tell how much of this is just Ryan Reynolds being given a part that really plays against what his like persona is, but he really works. And later in the film, we start to get these hints of this past. Like when Ben Mendelsohn's character finally visits Tony Roundtree, and it's clear that Tony Roundtree and Ryan Reynolds' character don't have a good relationship. You just question like what did Ryan Reynolds do? And he shows some a very vindictive side of himself when Ben Mendelsohn confesses that he's lied about winning money. Ryan Reynolds instigates a fight in a bathroom to get Ben Mendelsohn beat up. It's honestly hard to square. I found myself thinking that he was almost this symbol of good luck and good vibes, but there are these hints of darkness.
Yeah, a lot of times you believe his stories and you believe his persona, and then he sort of shows you his true colors, and it just sort of makes you question everything he has said up to that point. Like, has he just been bullshitting everything he's told Gary, or what has he done really in his life? And you talk about those moments of him instigating a fight so that way Gary gets beat up or things like that. Or I think of the scene as well when they go to the dog track, and he doesn't fully believe Gary in terms of what horse he wants to bet on, and he allows him to, what we believe, waste all of his money on this one dog that ends up losing, or horse, sorry. And then he's like, okay, well, I saved $200, $100 for you, $100 for me. This is where we split up. And he's like, Gary's like, no, we can use this 200. We'll go all in. We'll keep doing it. He goes, no, you have $100. You can do that $100 with whatever you like, but I am done. This is my $100 to go back home. And then Gary leaves with his tail tucked between his legs, all sad and depressed and doesn't know what to do. And then we see the next moment is Curtis going up to the counter, realizing that he put the bet on a different horse altogether and has a fat stack of cash awaiting him, which is just about the most heartbreaking thing, that he could betray Gary in such a way.
I'm actually so glad you brought up that scene, because that's actually the scene where the title of the movie comes in. The horse that Ryan Reynolds' character bets on is named Mississippi Grind. And I read it sort of a different way. I thought Ryan Reynolds was doing it like to save Ben Mendelsohn's Jerry. Like he is almost doing a favor, like having Ben Mendelsohn lose so he has to go back and maybe stop gambling. I thought of it almost as an act, like as much as an act of betrayal as an act of friendship.
Yeah, it's definitely one that I think you can read it in different ways. For me, it feels a bit of a betrayal because he does it behind his back and doesn't share the winnings with him. So in that sense, I feel like it's a bit of a betrayal, but it definitely does seem like it's he was sort of saving Jerry from himself as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, and I think that ambiguity is what helps with the title.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially since, like, up to that point, Jerry has been saying that basically their mutual good luck is anything that involves rainbows or things like that, and so constantly that theme comes up, especially when they're betting on things or they see things that they perceive to be signs as good luck. And Curtis basically just goes, "Yeah, I think this is kind of all bullshit. I'm just gonna do my own thing and bet for a horse that has nothing to do with rainbows and weather elements."
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Like that. Yeah. Oh God, it's such a complicated scene because, um, like the movie is so invested in this friendship, but this very pivotal scene is an act against it.
Mm-hmm. Now, originally, Jake Gyllenhaal was actually cast in the Curtis part before dropping out and Ryan Reynolds being cast. I'm wondering what you think. Would you think the movie would work the same way with Jake Gyllenhaal, or maybe not as much?
Oh, it would be so different. Like Jake Gyllenhaal is he's such a cold, almost calculating presence. He's got like a Patrick Bateman vibe to him. Like that's the only way I could see him doing this character. Like it would play as a much darker movie, I think. It would feel like as like Jake Gyllenhaal and Ben Mendelsohn go on this road trip that Ben Mendelsohn's just getting used.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think Gyllenhaal is definitely the superior actor over Reynolds. But that said, Reynolds has that sort of inherent charm, which as of now I've grown very much sick of, and I'm not on board the Ryan Reynolds shtick train. But that said, it does work for this character, and you believing everything he says and understanding how someone like Jerry can fall under his spell.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the I think this movie is like a very heartwarming movie. It wants to be a very heartwarming movie, and I don't think Gyllenhaal would fit into that. You need to fall under the spell a bit. I mean, the underlying metaphor of this movie is this stab wound that Jerry suffers near the beginning of the movie. It's so deep. It's such a serious wound, and it goes uncommented on for the rest of the movie. And it's like what the movie's trying to say is something as simple as like them being together heals this deep, like almost fatal wound that Ben Mendelsohn is carrying.
Yeah, yeah. Let's maybe briefly talk on maybe some of the other side characters as well. Sienna Miller is in this playing a love interest for Ryan Reynolds' character. And this was one that I think did a pretty good job of revealing more backstory for Curtis. But overall, I'm not that big of a Sienna Miller fan and sort of found her role largely forgettable. She doesn't really make an impact. For me, the biggest impact she has is at the end of the movie. Curtis calls her up and was like, "Hey, let's actually do this. Let's go away, run away together. We'll go on a vacation. Don't worry about anything. I'll take care of you," all this sort of stuff. And she's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. You've said this before. How about we talk in the morning?" And the next morning, we see that he ignores a call from her, and he gets out of bed, and there's another woman in his bed, and like just an absolutely sort of crushing moment that really sort of shows the true character of Curtis at that moment, where he will say whatever he needs to say in the moment, but doesn't really live by a sort of code from one day to the next.
Yeah, I would agree. Sienna Miller didn't have a huge impact on me. I think she's only in like one or two scenes, but that idea that she's just left is definitely very heartbreaking. I mean, even in that last scene, doesn't he ask the receptionist at the hotel to run away with him after
Yeah.
he's just ignored this call from Sienna Miller?
Yeah, yeah, that was definitely like a very tragic thing. And once again, we're showing, oh, look how charming he can be. He's going to flirt his way to getting a host to go on a vacation with him. No, it just kind of shows what kind of a person he really is, too.
Yeah, I mean, this discussion is really changing. I'm seeing the movie. I initially was really not a fan of the ending because I thought it was like too happy. I was like, these people, like, they keep gambling and they like risk it all and they win and they go on to live happily ever after. But you're making me see that actually it's a lot darker than I initially thought.
Yeah, I don't think this is a happy ending for either character, frankly. I think that Curtis will continue sort of being this cad that he is, and stringing Sienna Miller's character along and all that sort of stuff. And maybe he does well successfully as far as having money and things like that, but I don't think he fixes the problems in his life. And then on the flip side, I think Jerry he has a little bit of money, but how long is that money going to last until what happens when he decides to go back to his old town and play another game of poker there and has a bad night? What happens next? Is he going to reach out to his daughter? Is he going to try to be the father figure that he thinks he is, but isn't actually? Like, I really didn't think this was a happy ending for either of them.
Yeah, I mean, he literally gets back in his old car. So
Yeah. Yeah. And then we also have what I think was a great sort of scene-stealing moment from Alfre Woodard, who plays the debt collector that Jerry owes money to. So there's just one scene where they meet in a diner, and she's like, "You got to pay up. I'm gonna start sending people after you if you don't pay up. You have one day to pay me." And she has a very intense presence, and she brings that in the one scene that she has. So it's a very memorable scene for me.
yeah, I agree. It's really it's that first inkling you get that this is really serious.
Yes, absolutely.
hmm And I also really liked Ryan. I really liked Curtis's mom. Oh my god, I'm blanking on which actor played her, but that one scene with Curtis's mom really stuck with me.
Yes. Yeah, where he goes to a casino and sees a woman, performing on stage playing music, and then they end up chatting at the bar, and you realize sort of halfway through the scene that they are mother and son, and just sort of you understand where Curtis came from and understand why he is the way he is.
hmm Yeah, you get that sense of being adrift, and you get this really heartfelt moment where he gives her some of his winnings.
Yeah, he gives her all of the winnings, I
Yeah,
believe.
all of them.
Yeah. And then, as much as sort of Sienna Miller didn't really connect as a love interest, I would say on the flip side, Leo Tipton, who plays her friend, and not quite a romantic interest for Jerry, but they have a bit of a spark one night when they meet. I think they deliver a terrific performance of you actually feel a genuine connection there, but one that Jerry can't consummate because he is so hung up on both his ex-wife and his life in general.
Yeah, that's a beautiful scene, and it ends with him playing the piano. I think he's playing Claire de Lune, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, something like
Um,
that. Yeah.
yeah, that's a really tender. That's a really tender scene.
Yeah, I really liked it, and definitely one that sort of showcased Ben Mendelsohn's acting abilities a lot.
hmm
All right. Well, do you have any last things you want to talk about for this film that we didn't bring up before we get to our games, or are you ready to move on?
No, my one thing is just something really funny that I noticed at the end. Like, if you thought that this movie was taking the piss out of these CD recommendations that Jerry is listening to in the car, over the end credits, it's pretty crazy. If you go back, there's one where the CD recommends getting Botox so people can't read your face. And then directly after it says, look at people's foreheads and see if they've been taking Botox.
Yes. It was a really great running joke whenever this CD played, where it might be a legitimate actual, gambling tip sort of audiobook thing, but one that every time that it was playing, I got a bit of a chuckle out of.
Yeah, just hilarious.
Yeah. All right, so we are now going to go to our game portion of the episode, where we're going to make our double bill pairing and then our would you rather question. So let's start things off with our double bill pairing. I'll start with you, Eric. What movie that is not an A24 film would you recommend to watch with Mississippi Grind?
Yeah, okay. My recommendation is it's from last year. It's Dustin Guy DeFay's The Adults. This is an American indie drama starring Michael Cera. He is one of 3 siblings, and they're all very emotionally stunted. They had very rough childhoods, and they basically struggle to connect over this weekend where Michael Cera's character, Eric, goes to visit them. And he hasn't set a time frame for how long he's going to be there. He sort of wants to leave immediately. So there's always this lingering sense that he's about to dip. But every night he goes and plays poker with these people in the neighborhood, and every night he basically uses this guise of needing to play more poker to stay another day. And I think it would be a really good pairing. It's this very sad use of gambling, this very tender relationship drama. It would be a great double bill.
Nice. This was a movie that I saw the trailer for and was interested in it, but I never got around to actually watching it and sort of completely fell off my radar. So good to hear that that this was a solid movie.
Yeah. What about you?
My pick is going to be Paul Thomas Anderson's very first film, Hard Eight. This is about a young man who sort of is down on his luck and isn't great gambling, and he ends up getting taught by a veteran professional, but they both end up sort of getting in over their head, especially as the young man falls for a cocktail waitress slash prostitute. And this is a movie that stars John C. Reilly and Philip Baker Hall as the 2 gamblers, and then Gwyneth Paltrow as the love interest. So it's definitely a little bit more heightened than Mississippi Grind, which really focuses on the human realism aspects of things. But it's not my favorite Paul Thomas Anderson movie, but it's one that I think works quite well with Hard Eight if you're sort of feeling in a casino mood, where not everything is super uplifting, not something like Ocean's 11 or The Hangover, things like that.
Yeah, that's a great choice. I haven't seen that movie in forever, but it definitely fits. I think that movie and those early PTA movies in particular are also very inspired by Altman, but maybe in a more showy way. Yeah, I honestly don't remember enough of it to speak too intelligently about it, but it's a great choice.
Yeah. All right. Well, then let us go to our would you rather question. So what question do you have for me?
Oh my God, I struggled with this a lot. And my would you rather question is basically like, was there a it's not even a would you rather, it's which of the cities that they traveled to did you like the most based solely on the montages and the depictions in the movie?
Oh gosh. Well, I don't really remember all of the ones they went to. I know they start in Dubuque, Iowa, and then they go to St. Louis. After that, I'm kind of hazy of what other ones they stop in. I know their final destination is New Orleans. So I will say, because I had my honeymoon in New Orleans, I'm going to go with that one because I just want to go back there.
That's an awesome choice. I was gonna say St. Louis solely because it has that nighttime like neon montage, almost Once Upon a Time in Hollywood style, with all the various lights in the city. Just beautiful.
I think that St. Louis is probably the city that looks the best in the film. Because I think they did a very purposeful way of filming these cities, of not necessarily fun places to be in, and St. Louis is probably the one that's closest to looking like it's fun.
Yeah, they make them look really romantic.
Yes. All right. Well, an early joke in the film is when Jerry and Curtis meet. Jerry says, Curtis as in Tony, and the response is no, like Mayfield. And Curtis spins it around and says, Jerry like Lewis? And he replies, no, like Ford. So when I say Eric, like Bana, you say...
Oh my God, Romer.
Oh, yes, there we go. Showing your film cred there.
Yeah. What about? Oh, you say Bana? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I just haven't seen very many Eric Bana films, but yeah, I love Romer.
Love it. And then do you want to try spinning around on me?
Yeah, Dakota. What's your first Dakota?
Well, what one would you go with?
Johnson.
No, like Fanning.
Oh, nice.
I purposely looked up, I'm like, famous Dakotas, and like the Wikipedia article that came up is like, there's only like 10 famous people named Dakota, and most of them are either athletes or writers.
Mm-hmm. I mean, for me, it's just Madam Web. I haven't seen it, but that whole cycle, top of mind.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was younger, I would often get Dakota like Fanning, but now that I'm older and Dakota Johnson's more popular, people ask that instead.
That's awesome.
Yes. So that was what it was. As soon as that joke came up, I'm like, oh, I gotta write this down. My would you rather? And you crushed it, so I'm so happy that you said Eric Romer.
You know, it caught me by surprise, though. I'm like, there aren't too many famous Erics, but I'm glad I thought of a good one.
Yeah. I don't know if Marta Georgievich is going to listen to this or not, but she'll be very happy with that pick.
Oh, I hope so. I have the Green Ray shirt. I have a Pauline at the Beach hat. I should have worn them if I'd known.
All right. Well, Eric, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It really was a pleasure. I hope you had a good time, and I hope this isn't the last time that you come on as well. But where can people find you, and what do you have to promote today?
Yeah, so you can find me at my Substack, The Insert. I generally write about new art house and experimental films, as well as I try to write about some older films as well. Right now, I'm writing about a series of Nathaniel Dorsky and Jerome Hyler films that played in Seattle very recently. I recently had a review of Martin Reitman's La Practica. So yeah, go check them out. And I had such a good time on the podcast, Dakota. I've been so excited to come on for so long. And yeah, I had a great time. So thank you again.
Excellent. Well, I hope I didn't disappoint then.
Not at all. It was amazing.
This has been a That Shelf podcast. Visit thatshelf.com for more great film discourse. Follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, and Threads at ContraZoomPod. What are your thoughts on Mississippi Grind? Send an email to ContraZoomPod@gmail.com. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you like to listen to podcasts on YouTube, we do post all episodes there as well. And if you really like the show, consider tipping us on coffee. Thanks for checking us out.